Today I've got a story that's equal parts crazy and relatable. Think neighbor drama turned full-on backyard showdown. You've got your dream house, a big OL yard with trees you love, and then one day, your neighbor decides she's entitled to it. Sound nuts, right? Well, it gets better or worse, depending on how you look at it. Before we jump in, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. We've got plenty more stories like this coming your way. The day I signed the papers for my house 3 years ago, I felt like I'd won the lottery. It wasn't anything fancy, just a single-story place from the 70s, with chipped beige paint and a roof that had seen better days. But the backyard? That was the jackpot. A wide, sprawling stretch of green, dotted with trees, an oak, a maple, and even a peach tree someone had planted long before I was born. I could already picture it. Rows of tomatoes and peppers growing under the sun, a grill sizzling with burgers on a lazy Sunday, a cold drink in my hand as I kicked back on the porch. Growing up in a shoebox condo, I'd always craved space like this, a little patch of earth to call my own. This was my oasis, my escape from the grind. The neighbors seemed to seal the deal. The folks to my right, the Hendersons, waved from their driveway the day I moved in, offering a plate of cookies and a tip about the best diner in town for pancakes. Across the street, old Mr. Tomas tipped his hat and told me which plumber wouldn't rip me off. It felt like a community, the kind you see in movies where people actually care. But to my left, that was Linda's house. Silent, still like it was holding its breath. I catch a flicker of curtains now and then, but no hello, no wave. I figured she was just private, maybe a recluse who liked her own company. No big deal. I had enough on my plate settling in, anyway. That first summer, I threw myself into the yard. I hauled bags of mulch through the side gate, planted herbs along the porch, and hung a couple of bird feeders near the fence. The oak tree loomed over it all, its branches stretching wide like a guardian. I'd sit out there after work, listening to the leaves rustle, feeling the stress of the day melt away. It was perfect until it wasn't. One late Saturday afternoon, I was wrestling with a bird feeder that wouldn't stay put when a voice cut through the quiet. "Hey you, can I talk to you for a minute?" I looked up, and there she was, Linda, leaning over the fence. Her hair was a mess of tight curls, and her face was set in a way that said she wasn't here to chat about the weather. I set down my screwdriver and walked over, figuring it was about time we met properly. She didn't waste a second. "I need to expand my garden," she said, like it was an order. "My yard's too small, and you've got more than enough space back there. I'd like to put some raised beds in your yard, maybe a storage box for my tools, too. It won't take up much room." Her tone was so matter-of-fact. I almost laughed, thinking it was a joke. Who says that to someone they've never even introduced themselves to? But her eyes were dead serious, locked on me like I owed her something. I blinked, caught off guard. No, I don't think so," I said, keeping it polite but firm. "This is my property, and I'm not really comfortable with that." I thought that'd be the end of it. A quick no, a shrug, and we'd both move on. But Linda's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Neighbors are supposed to help each other out," she muttered, barely loud enough for me to hear, before turning on her heel and storming back to her house. The slam of her door echoed across the yard. I stood there, staring at the fence, a weird knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she'd looked at me, like I'd crossed some invisible line. I shook it off, telling myself she was just having a rough day. People get weird sometimes, right? I went back to my bird feeder, but the peace I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a nagging feeling I couldn't quite place. Over the next few weeks, I'd catch her watching me. I'd be out mowing the grass or watering the plants, and there she'd be, a shadow behind her window, eyes tracking me like a hawk. My buddy Damon came over once and cracked a joke about it. "Dude, you've got a fan club," he said, nodding toward her house. I forced a laugh, but it didn't sit right. Something was brewing, and I didn't like the taste of it. Little did I know, that Saturday was just the opening act. Linda wasn't some quirky neighbor with a green thumb. She was a storm waiting to break, and my backyard was right in her path. Life rolled on after that awkward run-in with Linda, but the air felt different, like the calm before a storm you can smell coming. I tried to shrug it off, focusing on my own stuff. Work was kicking my ass with a new position that meant late nights. My sister was hobbling through recovery after surgery, and I was still tinkering with that half-finished garden bed in the backyard. Linda's weird demand faded into the background. Just another odd moment in the chaos of my days. I figured she'd gotten the hint and moved on. Boy, was I wrong. It was a crisp afternoon a few weeks later when everything flipped upside down. I've been over at my sister's place, helping her with groceries and hauling trash bags to the curb when I finally headed home. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink as I pulled into my driveway. That's when I saw it, a tall wooden plank leaning against my fence right on my side of the property. It was jammed up against the side gate, the one I used to drag mulch bags through or roll the lawnmower out. My first thought was, what the hell? Maybe a storm had knocked something loose. But then I got closer and my stomach dropped. There, sprawled across the plank like some twisted barricade, was a massive limb from my oak tree. Not a little branch. This was a thick, heavy chunk, sawed off clean, the cut still glistening with fresh sap. That oak was the heart of my yard, its wide canopy shading my mornings and whispering in the breeze at night. Seeing it hacked up like that hit me like a punch to the gut. I parked the car and bolted over, my boots crunching on the gravel. The closer I got, the worse it looked. The cut wasn't sloppy or accidental. Someone had taken a saw to it with purpose, leaving the severed limb right where it had blocked my gate. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to piece it together. Who'd do this? Kids messing around? A freak accident? Then I heard her voice, sharp and smug, slicing through the quiet. Maybe now you'll learn to respect your neighbors. I whipped around, and there was Linda, standing on her side of the fence, arms crossed, a smirk curling her lips. She looked like she'd just won something, like this was her big checkmate. Did you do this? I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I wasn't yelling. Not yet. You left me no choice, she shot back, not even blinking. You denied me access. Now you see how it feels when you can't get into your own backyard. Her logic was so warped it almost made me dizzy, like chopping on my tree was some grand lesson in neighborly fairness. I stared at her, the smirk still plastered on her face, and something snapped into focus. This wasn't just about a garden. This was personal. That's vandalism, I said, stepping closer to the fence. You had no right to touch my tree. My hands were shaking now, but I kept them my sides. She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. That's not your tree. It's on the property line. Total bullshit. The trunk was smack in the middle of my yard. I'd seen the survey when I bought the place. But she didn't care about facts. She cared about winning. Stay right there, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm calling the cops. I never dialed 911 so fast in my life. Her smirk faltered for a second, but she didn't budge, just stood there glaring as I gave the dispatcher the rundown. Property damage, a neighbor admitting to it, and yeah, she was still on the scene. They told me a patrol car was on the way, and I hung up, locking eyes with Linda. She didn't say a word, but the air between us crackled with tension. 20 minutes later, headlights flashed down the street, and a police cruiser rolled up. 2 officers stepped out, their boots heavy on the pavement as they walked into my yard. One of them, a guy with a clipboard and a no-nonsense vibe, took a long look at the mess, the plank, the limb, the jagged scar on my oak. The other headed toward Linda, who was still standing there like she owned the place. Mind telling me what happened here? The first officer asked me, pen poised over his clipboard. I laid it out. Her demand for my yard, my no, and now this. I pointed at the tree, my voice catching a little as I explained how much it meant to me. Meanwhile, I could hear Linda talking to the second officer, her tone rising. I had every right to prune it. It hangs over my side, she insisted. The officer near me raised an eyebrow, scribbling something down. She cut it from my yard, I said, loud enough for them to hear. That limb didn't just fall. It's blocking my gate on purpose. The officer nodded, walking over to inspect the cut. It didn't take a genius to see she'd sawed it from my side. No way she could have reached that angle from hers. Linda's story was unraveling, and she knew it. Her voice climbed higher, sharp and defensive, but I tuned it out. The damage was done, and the cops were here. Whatever came next, I wasn't backing down. The backyard felt like a crime scene now, with the two officers moving around like they owned the place. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the yard bathed in the dim glow of my porch light and the faint flicker of street lamps. The oak stood there, wounded but still towering, its severed limbs sprawled across the plank like evidence in a murder mystery. I could still smell the fresh sap in the air, sharp and bitter, a reminder of what Linda had done. My hands were stuffed in my pockets, clenched tight to keep the anger from spilling out. The officer with the clipboard, Officer Hayes, his badge said, finished jotting down my story and started snapping pictures. The flash of his camera lit up the tree, the gate, the whole ugly mess. "This isn't just pruning," he muttered, shaking his head as he crouched to get a better angle on the cut. "She took a saw to it. No question." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that he saw it for what it was. Dread, because I knew this wasn't over yet. Over by the fence, Linda was putting on a show. Her voice cut through the evening like a chainsaw of its own, loud and insistent. "I'm in the HOA." She barked at the second officer, a younger guy with a buzz cut who looked like he'd heard every excuse in the book. "I have every right to trim branches that cross my property line. It's in the rules." She waved her arms like she was conducting an orchestra, her curls bouncing with every gesture. I almost admired her nerve, if it weren't so delusional. Buzzcut wasn't buying it. "Ma'am, you don't get to climb into someone's yard and chop down whatever you want," he said, his tone flat but firm. "And this," he pointed at the limb jamming my gate. "This isn't trimming. This is deliberate." Linda's face twisted, her smirk long gone, replaced by something frantic. She started yelling about how I was the problem, how I'd refused to cooperate with the neighborhood, how the HOA gave her authority. It was nonsense, and the officers knew it. Hayes walked back over to me, flipping his notepad shut. "She's digging herself a hole," he said under his breath, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "Claims she was forced to do it to teach you a lesson. That's not going to fly." I let out a shaky laugh, more from disbelief than humor. A lesson? What was this, grade school? But hearing her own words thrown back like that, it hit me how unhinged she'd become over a patch of dirt. Things escalated fast from there. Linda's voice hit a fever pitch, shrill enough to wake half the block. "You can't arrest me over a tree," she shouted as Buzzcut pulled out handcuffs. "This is unfair. He's the one causing trouble." The metal clicked around her wrists, and she jerked like she could shake them off, but it was no use. Hayes gave me a quick nod. "Property damage, possible trespassing," he said. "We've got enough to take her in. You want to press charges?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady now. "She doesn't get to wreck my stuff and walk away." He scribbled something else, then joined his partner. Linda was still yelling as they led her to the cruiser, her protests echoing down the street. "You can't do this. I'm in the HOA." The door slammed shut, muffling her, and the red and blue lights flashed as they pulled away. Just like that, she was gone. Hayes stayed behind to wrap things up. He took a few more photos, handed me a card with a case number, and walked me through what came next. "File a report, get an estimate for the damage," he said, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "She'll probably get a summons, maybe a fine or worse, depending on the judge. You've got a solid case. Her own admission seals it." I nodded, still processing the surreal turn my evening had taken. Arrested? On my property? 6 months ago, I'd have laughed at the idea. When the cruiser's taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood there in the quiet, staring at the mess Linda had left. The oak's wound gaped like an open mouth, the limb a heavy, lifeless thing pinning the plank in place. My yard didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt violated, like someone had kicked down the door to my sanctuary. I grabbed a flashlight from the garage and dragged the limb off the gate, the rough bark scraping my hands. It was too heavy to move far, so I left it there, a dark heap in the grass. Inside, I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache. My phone buzzed, Damon checking in. "Heard sirens." "You good?" he texted. I typed back a quick rundown, still half in shock. "Neighbor went psycho over the yard. Cops took her. Trees messed up." His reply came fast. "WTF? Call me tomorrow." I tossed the phone aside, too wired to sleep, but too tired to think straight. Linda had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and now the law was involved. Whatever came next, I wasn't letting her win. Not after this. The next morning, I woke up to a backyard that looked like a war zone. The oak limbs still lay there, sprawled across the grass like a fallen soldier, and the plank leaned against the fence, mocking me with its crooked angle. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and damp earth, a reminder of Linda's rampage. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, staring at the mess, trying to figure out where to start. My sanctuary was bruised, but I wasn't about to let it stay that way. First things first, I called an arborist. A guy named Pete showed up an hour later, toolbox in hand, his pickup rattling into the driveway. He walked over to the oak, running his fingers along the jagged cut, and let out a low whistle. "She did a number on this one," he said, squinting up at the tree. "But it's not a death sentence. We can trim the damage, treat the wound, keep it from rotting. Might take a few $100, though." I nodded, relieved it wasn't worse. That oak was a survivor just like me. While Pete got to work, I hauled the limb and planked to the curb, my arms aching by the time I was done. The gate swung free again, creaking on its hinges, and I felt a small win in that. But the bigger fight was still ahead. I dug out my property survey from a box in the garage. Crisp lines on paper proving the oak was mine, no question, and snapped photos of the damage with my phone. Evidence, just like Officer Hayes had said. I wasn't messing around. Later that day, I called my friend Sophie, a lawyer who knew her way around property disputes. She met me at the diner across town, sliding into the booth with a coffee and a grin. "So, your neighbor's a nutcase, huh?" she said, flipping through the police report I'd handed her. I told her everything. Linda's demand, the tree, the handcuffs. She leaned back, tapping her pen on the table. "You got her dead to rights. Vandalism, trespassing, and she admitted it to the cops. She's toast. Court will probably hit her with restitution, maybe probation. You pressing charges?" "Damn right," I said, stirring my coffee. "She doesn't get a free pass to trash my place." Sophie nodded, promising to help me file the paperwork. By the time we left, I felt a little lighter, like I had a plan, not just a pile of chaos. The next few weeks were a blur. Work was a grind with 2 new hires to train, and I spent weekends at my sister's, helping her get back on her feet. But home? Home was tense. Linda's place went quiet. No cars, no lights, just an eerie stillness. Word around the block was she'd bolted to a relative's place until the court date, which was fine by me. I just wanted peace. Still, I catch myself glancing out the window, half expecting her to pop up with a shovel or something crazier. The court hearing rolled around a month later, and I walked in with Sophie by my side, nerves buzzing. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee, the kind of place where time drags. Linda was there, sitting stiffly in a gray blazer, her curls tame for once. She looked worn out, like the fight had drained her, but her eyes still flicked to me with a spark of defiance. The judge called us up, and the prosecutor laid it out. Photos of the tree, the police report, my survey. Linda's story about trimming a branch fell apart fast when they showed the cut was on my side, the limb left as a barricade. She tried to spin it anyway, her voice sharp but shaky. "I just want to keep my yard safe," she said. "The HOA says we can trim what crosses the line." The judge wasn't impressed. "You don't saw down a tree from your neighbor's property and block his gate out of spite," he said, his tone dry as dust. "That's vandalism, plain and simple." He found her guilty. Restitution for the arborist's fees, probation, and community service. No jail time beyond the arrest, but enough to sting. She'd have to pay up, and I'd get my yard back piece by piece. Afterward, Linda caught me in the hallway, her voice low. "Look, I was stressed, okay? I messed up. Can we just—" She paused like she was fishing for something. "Maybe share the yard if you change your mind?" I almost laughed. After all this, she still didn't get it. "No," I said, cutting her off. "You don't trash my place and then ask for favors." I walked away, her apology hanging in the air, hollow as an empty promise. Back home, I sat on the porch, watching the oak sway in the breeze. Pete had patched it up, bandages of tar on the wound, the limb gone hauled off in his truck. It'd heal, he'd said with time. I sipped my beer, feeling the weight lift just a little. Linda was out of moves, and I'd stood my ground. But the quiet felt fragile, like it could crack any second. I wasn't done fighting for this place. Not yet. Spring crept in slow and steady, like it was testing the waters after a long winter. The peach tree in my backyard bloomed first, its pink blossoms popping against the green, a quiet promise that things could grow back. The oak stood tall, its wound scarred over now, a rough patch where the limb used to be. Pete had been right. It was healing, tougher than I'd given it credit for. I'd spent the restitution money Linda owed me on fixing it up, plus a few extras. New garden beds, a compost bin, and some thick shrub along the fence line. That last one wasn't just for looks. It was a wall, a clear keep out for anyone with big ideas. Linda's house stayed quiet for a while after the trial. I'd see her sometimes, pacing her narrow yard with a tape measure or hauling bags of soil, but she kept her distance. Word was she'd finished her community service at the food bank, and probation kept her on a leash. No more stunts, at least for now. Her yard looked different too, less cluttered, with a small veggie patch squeezed against the fence where the sun hit just right. Maybe she'd finally figured out how to work with what she had. I didn't care much either way, as long as she stayed on her side. One evening, I found a letter slipped under my front door. I froze, half expecting a threat, but it was from her, handwritten, smudged ink and all. She wrote about how she'd never meant to take my yard, just borrow it, and how she'd grown up thinking neighbors shared everything, like some old-school orchard her parents had. It was a decent apology, better than the hallway one, but it still felt like an excuse dressed up as regret. I read it twice, then tucked it in a drawer. No reply needed. The law had spoken, the checks were coming in, small, sometimes late, but Sophie handled that. And I was done talking. Life settled into something I could recognize again. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, walking dogs, and cleaning kennels. It was messy, loud, and exactly what I needed to shake off the lingering edge Linda had left. My mom came by for a long weekend, her eyes lighting up at the backyard. "You've made this place yours," she said, sipping tea on the porch, the oak's shadow stretching over us. I told her the whole saga, Linda, the tree, the cuffs, and she laughed, horrified and amazed. "Some people just can't let go," she said. I nodded, thinking she'd nailed it. The neighborhood shifted too. A few folks warmed up after the court stuff leaked out, swapping stories over the fence about Linda's past stunts, trying to claim a communal strip for tomatoes, picking fights with newbies. They'd never gone as far as I had, but they got it. I hosted a barbecue that summer, burgers sizzling on the grill, kids tearing around the yard, laughter drowning out the ghosts of last year. Damon brought his famous potato salad, and Mr. Tomas even shuffled over with a six-pack. It felt like a win, like I'd taken my place back. Then came the rumors. Damon heard it first. Linda's spinning a tale around town that I'd overreacted, that she'd just trimmed a branch and I'd sicked the cops on her. I rolled my eyes when he told me, but it stung a little. A lady at the farmer's market, Miriam, set me straight one Sunday. "She's full of it," she said, picking through tomatoes. "My sister's a cop." She said Linda confessed on the spot. I showed her the photos of the limb barricade, and she snorted. "Yeah, that's not trimming." By winter, I'd added a row of posts along the back of my property, where it sloped into the woods, reflective markers glinting in the dark, a line no one could miss. A wildlife camera kept watch, catching deer and squirrels. No more orange steaks like that weird scare months back. Linda passed by once, our eyes meeting across the driveway. She gave a small wave, tired looking, and I nodded back. No words, just a silent truce. Sitting on the porch now, grill smoke curling into the dusk. I feel it, peace hard-earned in mine. The oak rustles overhead, the shrubs stand guard, and the yard hums with life. Linda's still next door, but she's not my fight anymore. This place is my sanctuary, and I'll damn well keep it that way. When a neighbor like Linda thinks she can claim your space, trash your tree, and call it fair, it's a wake-up call. Home's your sanctuary, and no one gets to mess with that. I learned the hard way. Set boundaries, know your rights, and don't back down when someone crosses the line. Linda's drama ended with cuffs and a lesson. Actions have consequences. Hope you love this as much as I loved sharing it. What's your take? Ever had a neighbor push too far? Drop a comment. And if you're new, smash that subscribe button. We've got more crazy stories coming. Catch you next time for another twist-filled tale.